I was kissing her in the employee parking lot when my phone lit up with my wife's name. It was late. Past closing. The big blue Walmart sign was humming above us, throwing that cold light over everything. She had her hands curled into my shirt like she was afraid I'd step back. I probably should have. Her name was Melissa. She worked the front desk, handled returns and customer complaints. I used to joke that she had the hardest job in the building. People were cruel when they didn't get their way. That night, her forehead was resting against mine. We were both breathing too fast. I remember the smell of her perfume, something soft and warm that didn't belong in a parking lot that smelled like oil and rain. My wedding ring pressed into her wrist when she pulled me closer. I noticed it. I didn't stop. Then my phone started buzzing. I stepped back. She looked at the screen. She didn't say anything. Just watched my face change. That was the moment everything split in two. I'm 38. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I'd been married 12 years. No kids. My wife, Hannah, is a nurse. She works long shifts at the hospital downtown. We used to stay up late talking about everything. Lately we just passed each other in the kitchen like polite roommates. I had been at Walmart for almost 9 years. Assistant operations manager. Steady job. Predictable schedule. I was the reliable one. The guy who covered shifts. The one who never made a scene. If you asked anyone back then, they would have told you I was a good husband. Quiet. Responsible. Maybe a little dull. I didn't wake up one morning planning to ruin my life. It happened slower than that. I first noticed Melissa on a Tuesday afternoon in March. It was raining, one of those gray Ohio days that makes everything feel heady. I was walking past customer service when I heard a man's voice rise above the usual store noise. He was maybe mid-40s, loud, red in the face. He slammed a broken coffee maker on the counter and told her she was useless. Said people like her were why the country was falling apart. He laughed when she tried to explain the return policy. He said it figured that they'd hire anyone. I was 10 feet away. I saw her flinch. Just slightly. Most people wouldn't have noticed. She didn't fight back. She didn't get defensive. She just kept her voice steady and offered him store credit. Her hands were calm, but I saw the way her jaw tightened. After he left, she stood there for a second, just staring at the receipt printer like she needed to remember where she was. I should have kept walking. Managers aren't supposed to interfere unless it escalates. But something about the way she looked, small but still standing there, made me stop. I told her she handled that well. She glanced up at me, surprised. Her eyes were tired. Not weak. Just tired. She said it was part of the job. Shrugged like it didn't matter. But it did matter. The way he talked to her. The way people always seemed to think they could. Later that week, I overheard 2 cashiers whispering in the break room. They were talking about her age. Guessing. Laughing. One of them said she was trying too hard. Like she still thought she was 25. I didn't even know how old she was at that point. I just knew the tone. That quiet, sharp kind of judgment people use when someone doesn't fit where they expect them to. She walked in while they were still talking. The room went quiet. She pretended not to notice. Grabbed her coffee. Sat alone at the corner table. I sat across from her without thinking it through. I asked if she was okay. She gave me a look. Half amused. Half guarded. Said I was her manager. That I wasn't supposed to ask her that. I told her I was asking as a person. For a second, I thought she'd brush me off. Instead, she sighed. Not dramatic. Just tired. She said people got creative when they were bored. That she was fine. She wasn't fine. But she didn't need me to fix it. I think that's what caught me. She didn't look at me like I was her solution. She just looked alone. Over the next few weeks, I found small reasons to stop by customer service. Ask about shift coverage. Check inventory logs. Things I could have handled by email. We didn't flirt. Not at first. We talked about work. About how corporate never listened. About how customers had gotten meaner over the years. One night, after closing, we both stayed late for inventory. The store felt different when it was empty. Quieter. Like it was holding its breath. She was sitting on the counter, legs crossed, shoes off, rubbing her ankle. I asked if it was a long day. She smiled a little. Said they all were. I don't know why I said it, But I told her Hannah and I barely talked anymore. It slipped out. Maybe I wanted someone to hear it. She didn't judge me. She just listened. She said softly that was the worst kind of lonely. When someone's right there. That sentence stayed with me. After that, something shifted. Texts about schedules turned into jokes about customers. Jokes turned into late-night conversations in the parking lot after our shifts ended. She told me she was 45. Divorced. No kids. Her ex had left her for someone younger. She said it like she was reading a grocery list, but I could hear the old bruise in it. She said once, staring at the store lights, that she guessed she missed her window. I asked for what? She shrugged. For being someone's first choice. I didn't answer right away. I didn't trust myself to. Looking back, I crossed the line long before that night in the parking lot. It wasn't when we kissed. It was when I started looking for her in every room. When I felt lighter on days she worked. When I stopped telling my wife where I was. That night, when my phone buzzed with Hannah's name glowing on the screen, I knew I was standing in the middle of something that couldn't stay hidden. Melissa stepped back first. Gave me space. She always did that. She said I should answer. I watched the call go to voicemail. And for the first time in my life, I chose not to be the reliable one. The next morning, I avoided her. I stayed in the back office longer than I needed to. Answered emails twice. Walked the floor in the opposite direction of customer service. I told myself I just needed space to think. That I had to reset whatever had happened in that parking lot. Around noon, she knocked on my office door. She didn't wait for me to say come in. Just stepped inside and closed it behind her. Calm. Composed. That same steady face she used with angry customers. She said we needed to talk. Not dramatic. Just clear. I nodded. My throat felt dry. I said it was about last night. She said yeah. She stayed standing at first. Arms folded, but not defensive. Just holding herself together. She told me she didn't do messy. That she'd done messy before. It never ended well. I leaned back in my chair, trying to look more certain than I felt. I told her either did I. She gave me a small look at that. Not mocking. Just honest. She said quietly that I was married. There it was. No anger. Just fact. I said I knew. We let that sit between us for a second. I expected her to be emotional. To accuse me. To make it easier by being angry. Instead she was steady, and that somehow made it harder. She said she wasn't asking me to leave my wife. That she wasn't asking for anything. She just needed to know what this was before it got worse. I didn't have a neat answer. I had a marriage that had been running on autopilot for years. I had nights where Hannah and I ate dinner in silence, both scrolling on our phones. I had a house that felt more like storage than a home. And I had this new thing with Melissa. This energy. This pull. I told her I didn't feel like I was alive at home. The words surprised me as I heard them out loud. I said I didn't even know when that started. She watched my face carefully, like she was deciding whether to believe me. She asked what I felt with her. I hesitated. Not because I didn't know. Because I did. I said with her, I felt seen. It sounded simple. It was simple. But it was true. She finally sat down across from me. The distance between our chairs felt smaller than it should have. She said softly that was dangerous. I said I knew. For a minute neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint hum of the store outside. Carts rolling. The intercom announcement about a cleanup in aisle 12. She said this couldn't be some secret thing. That she wouldn't be someone's hidden option. I said quickly that she wasn't. She tilted her head slightly. Asked if she wasn't. That hit. I rubbed my face with my hands. I wasn't used to being this unsure. I'm usually decisive. Practical. I told her I didn't want to hurt her. Or Hannah. She let out a quiet breath. Said I already was? To someone. That was the first time it felt real. 2 days later, we ended up closing together again. It wasn't planned. Just how the schedule fell. I could have switched shifts. I didn't. The store emptied out around 10. We counted registers side by side. Our hands brushed once when we both reached for the same stack of receipts. Neither of us pulled away right away. It was small. But it was there. When we stepped outside, the air was cool. Early spring in Ohio. The parking lot lights made everything look softer than it was. She leaned against her car, arms crossed. Asked what my plan was? I laughed quietly. Asked if she thought I had one. She said she thought I didn't. She wasn't wrong. I admitted I hadn't been happy in a long time. Not really. That I just stayed. She looked at me differently then. Not as a manager. Not even as a man she'd kissed. Just as someone who was tired. She said she knew that feeling. Staying because it was easier than blowing everything up. She told me more that night than she ever had. About her divorce. About how she found texts on her husband's phone with a woman 10 years younger. About how he said he needed someone who made him feel young again. She said, almost casually, that she started counting lines on her face after that. Like they were proof of something. I felt something tighten in my chest. I told her she wasn't invisible. She smiled at that. A real smile this time. Said I was saying that now. I said I meant it. We stood there for a long moment. No grand gestures. No big declarations. Then she stepped closer. Not rushed. Not desperate. Just certain. She said quietly that if I was going to do this, I shouldn't do it halfway. I knew what she meant. Not just about her. About my marriage. That night, when I got home, Hannah was asleep on the couch. The TV still on. A half-empty glass of water on the table beside her. I covered her with a blanket out of habit. She stirred. Murmured that I was late. I said automatically that inventory ran long. I stood there watching her for a minute. The house was quiet. Familiar. Safe. And I realized I had already stepped outside of it. Over the next week, Melissa and I didn't pretend anymore. We weren't reckless. We were careful. But the tension between us had shifted. We texted more. Not just about work. About music. About memories. About things we hadn't told anyone in years. She told me she used to want kids. I told her I wasn't sure if I did. We laughed about how neither of us had figured life out the way we thought we would. One night, sitting in her car after shift, she reached over and took my hand. She didn't say anything. Just held it. And I held back. That was the real beginning. Not the kiss in the parking lot. Not the buzzing phone. It was the moment we both stopped pretending this was accidental. 2 weeks after that night in her car, we stopped pretending it was just conversation. At first, it was small things. I'd walk past customer service, and she'd glance up before I even spoke, like she could feel me there. We started timing our breaks the same. 10 minutes in the back hallway near receiving, sitting on overturned crates, sharing vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt sugar. We talked about everything except what we were doing. By April, it was routine. I'd text her before my shift. She'd send a simple morning with a picture of the sunrise from the employee entrance. We'd trade quiet jokes during long afternoons. If a customer was particularly cruel, I'd step in quicker than necessary. Not because she needed saving. Just because I couldn't stand the tone people used with her. One afternoon, a younger associate rolled her eyes and said, not quietly, that some people just couldn't move on from their prime. Melissa didn't react. She just kept scanning items. I felt it before I thought about it. I stepped forward and told the associate to mind her own performance metrics. Calm voice. Manager tone. But firm. The girl muttered an apology and walked off. Melissa didn't thank me. She waited until we were alone near the stockroom and said I didn't have to fight her battles. I said I knew. That I wanted to. She looked at me for a second longer than usual. Something soft in her expression. Something cautious too. After a month of this, we started staying out later. There's a diner off Route 23 that stays open all night. Vinyl booths, cracked leather, coffee that never really tastes fresh. We'd meet there after closing sometimes. Separate cars. Careful. We'd sit on the same side of the booth instead of across. It felt easier that way. Our shoulders touched. Our knees pressed together under the table. One night, she reached over and brushed a crumb off my shirt. Her fingers lingered. The air shifted. I remember the way the fluorescent light hit her face. The faint lines around her eyes when she smiled. I had never thought about lines like that before. Now I noticed them in the way you notice something precious. Something earned. She said quietly that I should tell her something I hadn't told anyone. I thought about it. Then I told her I was afraid of being ordinary. Of living a life that looked fine from the outside but felt empty inside. She listened without interrupting. She said after a moment that she was afraid of being replaced. Turns out she was. I reached for her hand under the table. She didn't pull away. By May, the distance between us was gone. The first time I went to her apartment, it was supposed to be quick. She said her sink was leaking and asked if I could look at it. I've always been the practical one. The fixer. Her place was small. 3rd floor walk up. Neutral walls. A single plant by the window that looked like it was trying its best. I fixed the pipe in 20 minutes. We stood in her kitchen after. Too close. Neither of us speaking. She said softly that this was a bad idea. I said I knew. But neither of us moved. When I kissed her that time, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't like the parking lot. It was slow. Careful. Like we were both memorizing something. I remember the warmth of her hands against my back. The way she exhaled when I pulled her closer. The quiet of the apartment around us. We crossed a line that night we couldn't uncross. Afterward, we lay side by side, not talking. The ceiling fan hummed above us. I stared at the spinning blades and felt both calm and terrified. She said into the quiet that this wasn't just physical. I answered it never was. But the physical part made it real in a way nothing else had. For a while, it felt like we existed in a separate world. A pocket of time that didn't touch my house, my marriage, my other life. I'd go home and sit at the kitchen table with Hannah. She'd tell me about a difficult patient. I'd nod. I'd respond. I'd act like everything was normal. But I was somewhere else. By June, I was staying at Melissa's apartment twice a week. Always with some excuse ready. Late inventory. Emergency shipment. Corporate visit prep. Hannah didn't question it much at first. We'd been drifting for years. I think she assumed I was burying myself in work. Melissa, though, started to change. Not in how she treated me. In how she carried herself. One evening, as we lay in her living room with the windows open, she traced a circle on my chest with her finger. She asked what we were doing. I didn't answer right away. She continued that she didn't want to be my escape. She wanted to be chosen. There it was again. That word. Chosen. I sat up. Ran a hand through my hair. I said I didn't know how to blow up 12 years. She didn't get angry. She just looked tired. She said quietly that she already survived someone choosing someone else. That she wouldn't do it again. That stuck with me for days. Around that same time, rumors started. Nothing direct. Just looks. A couple of associates stopping their conversations when I walked into the break room. A supervisor casually asking why I seemed to be near customer service so often. I told myself we were being careful. Professional on the floor. No obvious signs. But people notice patterns. The real turning point came during a store audit in July. Corporate showed up unannounced. Inventory discrepancies. Scheduling issues. Tension everywhere. Melissa and I worked side by side for 12 hours straight. She handled returns, paperwork, customer escalations. Calm. Efficient. Sharp. At one point, a regional manager questioned her competence in front of everyone. Asked if she understood updated policy. Her posture straightened. She explained it clearly, without raising her voice. She was right. He was wrong. I felt proud in a way that went beyond attraction. I saw how capable she was. How often she had to prove it. That night, after corporate left, we stood alone in the empty store again. I said we survived. She smiled, tired but satisfied. Said we were good together. She didn't just mean at work. I stepped closer. My hand found hers automatically. For a moment I imagined what it would look like if this wasn't hidden. If I could stand beside her without glancing over my shoulder. The obstacle wasn't subtle. It was my marriage. My vows. The house. The history. And every day I delayed, the tension tightened. By the end of July, Hannah finally asked the question. She said one night at the kitchen table whether I was seeing someone. She didn't yell. Didn't accuse. She just looked at me across the wood surface we'd eaten thousands of meals on. I froze. The silence felt louder than any argument. And in that silence, I realized the slow build had turned into something that was about to break. When Hannah asked me if I was seeing someone, I didn't answer right away. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, still in her scrubs. Her hair pulled back, face tired from a 12-hour shift. There was a small cut on her knuckle I hadn't noticed before. She said to just tell her the truth. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. In my head, there were raised voices, tears, anger. Instead, it was quiet. I said yes. The word felt heavier than I expected. She closed her eyes for a second. Not dramatic. Just steadying herself. She asked who she was? I thought about lying. Minimizing. Saying it wasn't serious. I said it was someone from work. She nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had clicked into place. Asked how long? I said a few months. The room felt smaller. The refrigerator humming too loud. The clock on the wall suddenly noticeable. She asked if I loved her. I hadn't planned to say it out loud yet. Not to Hannah. Not even to myself in that exact shape. I said yes again. That was the moment something ended. Hannah didn't throw anything. She didn't scream. She just stood up, walked to the sink, and rested her hands on the counter. She said quietly that she kept thinking it was stress. Or her schedule. She thought if she just waited, we'd find our way back. I didn't know what to say to that. There wasn't a clean explanation. I said I was sorry. It sounded thin. She turned around then. Asked if I was leaving. The truth was already written on my face. I said I thought I had to. She nodded once. A small, almost invisible movement. She said then not to drag it out. If I'd chosen choose. That word again. I packed a bag that night. Not much. A few shirts. My laptop. I stood in the doorway of the house for a long time before I left. It felt like walking away from a version of myself I'd spent years building. I drove straight to Melissa's apartment. She opened the door in sweatpants and an old t-shirt. No makeup. Hair pulled back. She looked surprised when she saw my bag. She asked what happened. I said I told her. Her expression shifted. Relief, fear, something in between. She asked and? I said I was leaving. She stepped back to let me in. Closed the door slowly. For a second, we just stood there. She said this was real now. I answered it had been real. She searched my face, like she was making sure I wasn't just reacting to guilt or adrenaline. She said not to do this because I felt caught. Not to do this because it blew up. I told her I was doing it because I loved her. The words came out steady. No poetry. No performance. Just true. She inhaled sharply. Like she'd been bracing for something else. She whispered for me to say it again. I said I was in love with her. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music swelling in the background. Just her living room lamp casting a soft light, the faint sound of traffic outside. She walked toward me slowly. Put her hands on my chest. She said she tried not to. That she told herself this was temporary. That I'd stay where I belong. She swallowed. Said but she was in love with me too. The relief in that moment was almost painful. Like something tight inside me finally loosened. She kissed me then. Not rushed. Not desperate. Slow and certain. Like we both understood the weight of what we were stepping into. When we pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. She said this was going to be messy. I said I knew. She said people were going to talk. I said I knew. She said I was about to go through a divorce. I nodded. She added quietly, almost as an afterthought, that she wasn't 25. I pulled back just enough to look at her. I said I didn't care. That I didn't want younger. I didn't want easier. I wanted her. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. We sat on her couch after that. Side by side. Planning something that didn't have a map. I told her I would file for divorce. That I wouldn't hide her. That if we were doing this, we'd do it honestly now. She listened carefully. She said no more secrets. I agreed. No more. The next week was a blur of paperwork, awkward conversations, and the heavy reality of separating finances and lives. Hannah moved into the guest room at first. Then she told me she'd stay with her sister while we figured things out. We kept it civil. Painful, but civil. At work, Melissa and I kept our distance on the floor. Professional. Controlled. But something had shifted between us. There was no more pretending this was casual. No more half measures. One evening after close, we stayed behind to finish reports. The store lights dimmed automatically at 10:30. The building felt hollow and quiet. She looked up from her laptop and said, almost shyly, that this was us now. I said yeah. She stood and walked over to me. Sat on the edge of my desk. She asked if I was sure. I reached for her hand. Held it firmly. I said I was sure. And for the first time since this started, there wasn't a question hanging between us. There were consequences waiting. Conversations ahead. Judgment we hadn't faced yet. But in that empty store, with the hum of the lights above us, we chose each other openly. And there was no going back. We told HR on a Monday morning. I didn't sleep the night before. Melissa didn't either. We didn't say it out loud, but we both knew this was the point where private choices became public record. We sat side by side in a small office near the back of the store. Gray walls. Fluorescent light. A framed poster about workplace ethics hanging slightly crooked. Sandra from HR folded her hands on the desk and looked at us carefully. She said, calm but alert, that we were disclosing a relationship. I answered yes. Melissa's knee was touching mine under the chair. Steady. Grounding. Sandra glanced at our files on her computer. Said we were in a direct supervisory structure. I said I knew. That's why we were here. There was a long pause while she outlined policy. We couldn't stay in the same reporting line. One of us would need to transfer departments or locations. Documentation would go in our records. Corporate would be notified. It felt clinical. Almost detached from the actual weight of what we'd done. Melissa said clearly that we weren't trying to hide it. We just wanted to handle it properly. Sandra nodded. Said that was the right approach. By the end of the meeting, it was decided. Melissa would transfer to another nearby store within the district. Same position. Different building. No direct supervision. On paper, it looked clean. In reality, it changed everything. The gossip started before lunch. I could feel it in the way conversations stopped when I walked into the break room. In the sideways glances. In the way one associate muttered something about how that's how you get better shifts. Someone printed a meme and taped it inside a locker. It disappeared quickly, but not before it made the rounds. Melissa called me that evening after her shift. She said quietly that they were saying she planned it. That she targeted me. The word stung. I said that wasn't true. She said she knew. But that didn't stop it. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. 2 days later, an anonymous complaint hit corporate. Allegations of favoritism. Improper conduct before disclosure. The language was vague, but the implication was clear. I was pulled into another meeting. This time with the regional manager on speaker. He asked direct questions. When did it begin? Was there any overlap in performance reviews? Had I shown bias? I answered everything honestly. There was no evidence of favoritism. Melissa's evaluations had been consistent for years before I ever stepped into her department more frequently. Still, suspicion lingers longer than facts. That night, Melissa sat on her couch with her phone in her lap, staring at nothing. She said softly that maybe we rushed this. Maybe she should have just transferred quietly and let it fade. I sat beside her. I asked if that was what she wanted. She shook her head. Said no. But that she didn't want to be the woman who wrecked my life. I said she didn't wreck it. That I chose this. She looked at me then, searching for hesitation. For regret. She continued that she could handle people judging her. That she'd handled worse. But if this cost me my career. I said it wouldn't, maybe more confidently than I felt. But doubt had started to creep in. The divorce process with Hannah moved quickly but heavily. She was polite with me. Distant. We met with lawyers. Split accounts. Sold the house. One afternoon, as we signed final paperwork, she looked at me across the conference table. She said she hoped the other woman was worth it. There wasn't anger in her voice. Just tiredness. I answered honestly that I hoped so too. Back at work, I focused harder than I ever had before. No more wandering to customer service. No more extended breaks. I kept my head down. Reviewed inventory numbers meticulously. Stayed late to correct scheduling inefficiencies that had nothing to do with Melissa. I needed my performance to speak for itself. In August, we had another corporate audit. Different team this time. Higher stakes. I treated it like a test. For 3 straight weeks, I tightened procedures. Reorganized backstock. Rebuilt the scheduling matrix to reduce overtime costs. Trained supervisors personally instead of delegating. Melissa, already at her new store, texted me encouragement at night. She wrote once at 11:30 p.m. to eat something. I replied that I was trying to save my reputation. She sent back that I didn't need to save it. I needed to show them who I'd always been. The audit came and went. 2 weeks later, I was called into the district office. I braced myself for bad news. Instead, the regional manager shook my hand. He said, "Strong turnaround. Best compliance numbers in the district this quarter." There was no apology for the scrutiny. No acknowledgement of the rumors. Just numbers on a page that couldn't be argued with. Words spread quickly. The whispers didn't vanish overnight, but they softened. It's harder to accuse someone of incompetence when the metrics are undeniable. Melissa's store reported strong customer satisfaction scores that same quarter. Her name was mentioned in a district newsletter for handling high return volume with 0 complaints. We weren't hiding. We weren't flaunting anything either. Just working. One evening, months after that first HR meeting, we met at the same diner on Route 23. She slid into the booth across from me this time, instead of beside me. She said we made it through the worst of it. I asked if we did. She smiled slightly. Said they were bored now. They'd moved on to someone else's drama. I watched her stir her coffee slowly. I asked if she ever regretted it. The question was soft. Careful. I thought about the house I no longer owned. The quiet dinners that had turned into lawyer meetings. The long looks from coworkers. Then I looked at her. I said no. She reached across the table and took my hand. She said good. Because she wasn't walking away this time. And in that small diner, under the hum of tired fluorescent lights, I felt something settle between us. Not the rush from the beginning. Not the fear from the middle. Something steadier. We had chosen each other in the open. Now we had to keep choosing, every day. By winter, we stopped living out of overnight bags. At first, I was still splitting time. A few clothes at her place. My old apartment across town with half-empty rooms and unopened boxes. It felt temporary, like I was still waiting for someone to tell me where I actually belong. One Sunday morning, I was standing in her kitchen making coffee. Snow falling outside her third-floor window. She was wrapped in a blanket on the couch, reading something on her phone. She said casually that I was out of closet space. I looked over. Said I could make room. She lowered the phone and studied me. Said that wasn't what she meant. There was a pause. She said I should just move in. Not dramatic. Not kneeling with a key in her hand. Just practical. I leaned against the counter, mug warming my palms. Asked if she was sure. She shrugged lightly. Said I was there 4 nights a week anyway. And she was tired of pretending this was temporary. That word again. Temporary. I thought about the empty apartment I barely used. About driving back and forth like I was commuting between 2 versions of my life. I said okay. That was it. 2 weeks later, my apartment was cleared out. We carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, laughing when one nearly slipped from my grip. Her neighbors watched from their doors with polite curiosity. We didn't make a big announcement. We just blended. Her closet had a new section of button-downs and jeans. My toothbrush sat beside hers. My coffee mug joined her small collection in the cabinet. The first night everything was officially under one roof, we didn't go out to celebrate. We ordered takeout and sat on the floor because the table was covered in unpacked boxes. She leaned her head on my shoulder. She said quietly that this felt normal. It did. Not fireworks. Not drama. Just normal. Over the next few months, we built small routines. She left for work earlier than I did now, at her new store across town. I'd wake up to the sound of the shower running. Sometimes she'd kiss my shoulder before she left. Sometimes she'd just whisper to lock the door when I went. At night, we cooked together. Or tried to. She chopped vegetables too fast. I oversalted everything. We argued gently about music in the kitchen. Ordinary things. There were still moments when the past brushed against us. A letter from my lawyer about final divorce paperwork. An unexpected text from Hannah asking about a tax document. Melissa never pried. She just asked if I was okay and wait for the real answer. By spring, the divorce was finalized. I came home that evening holding the official envelope. It felt lighter than I expected. She asked, well? I said it was done. She didn't jump. Didn't celebrate. She just walked over and wrapped her arms around me. Held me longer than usual. She whispered that she was sorry it had to hurt. It was the first time she acknowledged the cost without flinching. At work, things had stabilized too. My numbers were solid. I'd been assigned to mentor 2 new assistant managers. The regional manager mentioned me as a potential candidate for store manager within the year. Melissa had earned a shift lead promotion at her new location. Different team. Different building. No shadow of our history following her around. One night, after we both had long days, we walked along the Scioto Mile downtown. The river was calm. The city lights reflected softly on the water. She slipped her hand into mine without looking at me. She said she used to think this part of her life was over. The part where someone builds something with you. I squeezed her fingers gently. I told her she didn't miss her window. She smiled faintly. Asked if I really didn't care about the age thing. I stopped walking and turned toward her. I said I cared that she was kind. That she was smart. That she called me out when I was being an idiot. I didn't care about a number. She searched my face for doubt. There wasn't any. That night, back at the apartment, I found myself watching her as she brushed her hair in the bathroom mirror. The light caught the faint lines around her eyes. The same ones people had mocked. They looked like proof of survival to me. A few weeks later, I asked her to take a day off. She said suspiciously, "Why?" I replied, "Because I asked nicely." We drove out to Hocking Hills early that morning. Packed coffee in a thermos. Hiked a trail she'd never been on before. At the overlook, the trees stretched out below us, green and endless. The air smelled like damp earth and spring. She was standing at the edge, hands in her jacket pockets. She said I was quiet. I felt my heart thudding harder than it had during any audit or HR meeting. I said I'd been thinking. She said that was always dangerous. I smiled. I told her I spent a long time living carefully. Doing what was expected. Staying because it was easier than changing. She turned to face me fully now. She said, "And?" I said, "And choosing her was the first time I didn't pick the safe option." Her eyes softened. I took a breath. I told her I didn't want this to just be surviving gossip and audits and paperwork. I wanted a life with her. Not just an apartment. Not just routines. Her expression shifted slowly, understanding where I was going. I said I wasn't great at speeches. But I knew this. I didn't want to wake up next to anyone else. I didn't want to build anything with anyone else. I reached into my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking more than I expected. I said I didn't have a grand plan. Just this. I knelt down on the dirt trail, feeling slightly ridiculous and completely certain. I said simply, to marry me? No audience. No music. Just wind through trees and distant birds. She stared at me for a second that felt like a year. She whispered that I was serious. I said, completely? Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Then she laughed softly, half disbelief, half joy. She said I really didn't do anything halfway. I waited. She stepped forward, pulled me up before I could stay kneeling too long, and kissed me. She said yes against my lips. Yes, she would. There wasn't applause. Just us, standing on that overlook, holding each other while the world kept moving around us. For the first time, it didn't feel like we were fighting against something. It felt like we were building toward it. We didn't plan a big wedding. Neither of us wanted that. There had already been enough noise in our story. Enough people with opinions. Enough whispers in break rooms and side glances in hallways. We chose something small. A late September afternoon in Columbus. A quiet courtyard behind a restored brick building downtown. 25 chairs. White folding ones that didn't match perfectly. A string of simple lights overhead, even though the ceremony was before sunset. My parents came. Her sister flew in from Arizona. A few close friends. 2 coworkers each, people who had stuck by us when it wasn't convenient. No one from corporate. No spectacle. I stood near the small archway with my hands clasped in front of me, trying not to look as nervous as I felt. I'd been married before. I knew the weight of vows. I knew how things could unravel. That knowledge made this feel heavier. And more real. When she walked into the courtyard, the conversation stopped. She wasn't in a dramatic gown. Just a simple ivory dress that fell softly to her knees. Her hair down. Minimal makeup. She looked like herself, just brighter. For a second, I remembered the break room whispers. The jokes about her age. The comments about trying too hard. Standing there, watching her walk toward me, None of that made sense. She looked steady. Certain. When she reached me, she took my hands without hesitation. Warm palms. Slight tremble in her fingers. The officiant kept it short. We had both requested that. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from a card. I said quietly that I'd already stood in front of people and said vows once. And I didn't understand then what choosing someone every day really meant. She watched me carefully. I said I thought love was something that just stayed if you were responsible enough. Quiet enough. Careful enough. A few people smiled softly. I continued that, but with her, I learned that love isn't about staying comfortable. It's about being honest. Even when it costs something. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I promised to choose her when it was easy. And when it wasn't. I promised to respect her in rooms where she wasn't standing. I promised not to shrink her to make anyone else comfortable. Her turn. She didn't rush either. She said she spent a long time believing she had missed something. Like there was a window for being loved fully, and it had closed. She paused, steadying her voice. She said I walked into her life in a fluorescent-lit store, of all places. And instead of making her feel smaller, I made her feel seen. A small laugh moved through the guests. She promised to stand next to me, not behind me. She promised to tell me when I was wrong. And she promised not to let me settle for safe when I deserved real. There was a quiet murmur of approval. When we said I do, it wasn't explosive. It was calm. Grounded. He pronounced us married, and I kissed her gently, aware of the way her hands curled into the front of my jacket like they had in that parking lot a year earlier. Only this time, there was no buzzing phone. No shadow hanging over us. Afterward, we had dinner at a small Italian restaurant down the street. Long table. Candles. Too much pasta. My mother hugged her and whispered something that made her laugh. Her sister clinked a glass and told a story about Melissa climbing a fence at 16 just to prove she could. At one point, I caught the eye of a former coworker who had seen the worst of the gossip months ago. He raised his glass toward us with a small nod. Not everyone believed in us at the beginning. Some probably still didn't. But we were standing there. Married. Steady. Later that night, when it was just the two of us back at the apartment, she kicked off her shoes and leaned against the closed door. She said softly that we really did it. I said yeah. She walked over and wrapped her arms around my waist. She murmured against my chest that some people said this wouldn't last. I said I knew. She asked, and? I said, and they don't live here. She smiled at that. We didn't go on a big honeymoon. We took a long weekend in Chicago instead. Walked along the lake. Ate too much. Slept in. Simple things. Sitting on a bench near the water one evening, she rested her head on my shoulder. She asked if I ever thought about how different this could have gone. I said honestly all the time. She looked out at the skyline. She said she was glad I didn't choose safe. So was I. Our story didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the hurt that came before it. But it proved something quietly. That even after mistakes, even after judgment, even after people decide who you are without asking, you can still build something honest. And you can stand in front of the people who matter, hand in hand, knowing you earned it. Sometimes I think back to that first afternoon in the store. The rain outside. The way she stood there after a customer tore into her, pretending it didn't land. If I had kept walking that day, my life would look very different. Safer maybe? Quieter. Less complicated. But also smaller. I'm not proud of how this started. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I made choices that forced other people to adjust around my honesty coming late instead of early. I carry that. But I also know this. Staying in something just because it looks stable from the outside doesn't make it right. And leaving doesn't automatically make you selfish. Sometimes it just means you finally stopped pretending. I used to think being reliable was the same thing as being good. Show up. Don't cause trouble. Keep everything smooth. What I learned is that reliability without truth is just delay. Melissa taught me that. She had spent years being told, quietly and directly, that she was past her prime. That she should be grateful for attention. That she should shrink herself to fit what made other people comfortable. Watching her refuse to do that changed me. Age turned out to be the least interesting thing about her. What mattered was how steady she was when people were cruel. How she kept showing up even when whispers followed her. How she demanded to be chosen, not hidden. And I had to grow into someone capable of choosing openly. People will always have opinions. About who you love. About when you should settle down. About what's appropriate. About what looks good from the outside. They don't live in your house. They don't sit at your kitchen table. They don't feel the silence between you and someone else. Only you do. One honest decision can change everything. It can cost you comfort. It can cost you reputation for a while. It can force you to stand in rooms where you're misunderstood. But it can also give you something solid. Connection over image. Truth over convenience. Partnership over performance. When I wake up now, she's usually already up, moving quietly through the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifts down the hallway. Sometimes she hums without realizing it. There's nothing dramatic about those mornings. Just two people who chose each other, again and again, after the noise faded. If there's anything I'd say to someone standing at their own crossroads, it's this. Don't choose safe just because it's familiar. Choose the thing that lets you stand up straight in your own life. Your story doesn't end at one mistake. Or one divorce. Or one season where you feel invisible. It keeps going. And sometimes, all it takes is the moment you decide to stop walking past what matters.